So I'm Layla-Roxanne Hill. I'm a writer, artist, curator who's interested in decolonisation and cultural production and Black Scottish lives, and I'm really pleased and proud to be chairing this panel tonight. So I'll just be trying to keep everything in order. And yep. So the way that the evening's going to go is we're going to hear from everybody that's sitting on the panel. So at the very end, we have Anjola, who is a fourth-year student of architecture at the Glasgow School of Art. We have Alicia, who's a third-year student, Mia, who's also a third-year student, Carl, who's a third-year student, and Tareq, who is also a third-year student. Everybody here is also a member of the Glasgow School of Art People of Colour Society. And yep, that's introductions. So first off, we're going to hear from Alicia, who's going to be talking a little bit about what the project is, and why they're doing it. But I'd like to say that it'd be really nice to give each of our panellists just a warm round of applause and as a thank you for putting this together.
So I think everything started because it would just be through personal conversations we'd have with each other. We kind of realized we had like a lot of similar experiences, and that was mostly because we were people of color and kind of experiencing things that not everyone else, like in our class, would understand. So we'd kind of usually see ourselves as the other when, like, within architecture itself, and I think that's where the name came from.
We're on a roll now. Okay, so now we're going to be hearing from Tareq.
So one of our main references was Edward Said. Basically, when we thought of the name Other, we were trying to basically describe the fact that we're all coming from different experiences. And Edward Said came across because basically he was this Palestinian American professor who used to teach comparative literature. And through comparative literature, he was trying to understand what's the view that the West has of the rest of the world, and how often the rest of the world was was categorized into very big generalizations. And what we're trying to say is that Other is representing different experiences, and there's no one category, but each of us has totally different experiences.
So our second, another original influence was Solange, specifically her album A Seat at the Table, which we heavily were influenced by. And in that album, she sort of talks about, if you say a table is society and you let society manifest in that table, do people have the same voices, and do they have the same chance at that, saying their piece and saying whatever they need to say? And we realized that obviously as POC we've had specific experiences, and we would argue that we hadn't had the same experiences that our white counterparts had had. So we wanted to explore how could we, just through a simple physical representation of a table, explore those experiences. And so we started exploring that and talking about how if you were to subvert the use of a table, what happens to that table? If you were to look at power plays, what happens to that table? If we were to try and allow people to sit at our table, how do they then change themselves to sit at that table? Because I think a commonality for all of us was changing ourselves in specific ways to be accepted in the society that we live in. So if we were to make people do that and force them to do that, would it then change their opinions and their perspectives? And so obviously, yeah, we were heavily inspired.
Okay, so we decided to make a physical table. First of all, to get one-to-one experience, because might as well. But this particular table to express the differences that we have and I guess the discomfort we feel we experience on a daily basis, we decided to play with the table. So, for example, the top of the table slants to represent that there's not necessarily an equality in the system. So if you were sat on the higher side of the table, you might see yourself as bigger than the person at the lower side might feel that their view is a bit obscured and they don't really know. But it's simple. If both people got up and swapped places, then you could be either person. So essentially the idea of hierarchy or the idea of, I guess, power plays, it really just is a matter of chance, and it shouldn't be down to a person's color to determine where they sit in society or whether or not they need to change versions of themselves or try to fit into, I guess, what is considered the norm, essentially.
Yeah, and so yeah, we have the table obviously, which acts as a conversation piece with sort of audio attached to it as well. So when you listen to it, you feels like you're, surrounded with maybe other people at the table that tell them of their experiences or our experiences. But we also decided to have a zine accompanying this project as well for several reasons, but first of all, to just document what we're doing, starting off with the sort of starting points that we've already mentioned with Edward Said and Solange and so on. And documenting our thoughts during the process, what sort of main things we would wanted to come across from the project, but also, so looking back at what we're doing, but at the same time, it's also looking to the future and sort of, hoping that this is just the sort of starting point of some continued conversation. Maybe there'll be hopefully more editions or issues of the zine. And part of that is also, so we have like texts and also images and other short texts that have been provided by like other POC that we know from across the world, basically. So also in terms of images that sort of not necessarily have to do with what the text is saying, but of course they're overlapping, but they can give you connotations of other key themes. So I shouldn't be going on about what the zine is about, but just grab a zine when this is done. Yeah, donations welcome.
I guess also we wanted to, with the zine, it's sort of like us researching how we were going to come to this conclusion and us finding our way along that journey. And so we also didn't want to stick to the typical narrative of how you would design something. Like you'd look at a famous architect and then you'd look at their buildings and then you'd sort of follow this very traditional route. And we wanted to take it, or we wanted to feel ownership, or we wanted to own what we came up with, and also be inspired by people that actually have affected us in real ways. And so I think all of us connected with Said's work in the sense of that we'd been othered or we had in some way felt different. And then also listening to Solange's album, it was kind of groundbreaking in the sense of it wasn't just our single experience, and it sort of unified us. So we wanted to take just a journey with how we actually came to our final piece, because I don't think you have to look at the classic architects and then get to that final point. You can have so many other means, and I think the future of architecture is going in that direction as well, and architecture is design. It doesn't have to be limited to just one practice. So the idea that we could create something that wasn't just like, oh, this is representative of a building, or we're gonna like make a scale model and this is a building we've felt some sort of adverse emotion in. Just the idea that we could create something that was symbolic and, yeah, spoke of our experiences, and hopefully when people then sit at that table, they can in some way feel or in some way understand the emotions that we felt on a day-to-day basis.
We also, after we realized that we did want to make a table, it only made sense to actually create conversations over this table, and with the table representing kind of all of our emotions. It was kind of the first time when we realized that we can actually get a group of people together and kind of discuss similarities or differences and kind of see what the main issue is, because what we ended up doing was kind of just talking to our friends from around the school and just getting a group of people who were different ages with different backgrounds, and we all just sat around and kind of just asked each other these honest questions about how architecture makes you feel, about how architectural education might make a person of color feel left out or not understood. So that's why we wanted to bring in the element of audio into it when someone was kind of viewing our table. We kind of wanted to invite them to our table, but almost as if they were eavesdropping on our conversation, and kind of this element of feeling uncomfortable with this whole, with the whole power play and the actual physicalities of the table, but also having our voices heard and kind of us just working out our thoughts. Some of it might not even make that much sense, but it was just us trying to figure it out, because I don't think our institution kind of gave us an opportunity to figure that out, and that we're left to do that by ourselves. But I think one of the best things that we learned from it was that now we have each other, we have so much support from each other, and we can create a library of resources to help each other in the future. So this kind of feels like a starting point, if anything, and hopefully with the zines and kind of opening up this conversation, we can kind of make everyone more aware.
And one of the key housekeeping bits that I've got to mention is that the zines are available over there for donation, so please make sure that you take one away and donate. It's a lot of work that's gone into it, and you can also take posters away for free. So now we're just going to move into a more kind of guided part of the discussion, and then afterwards we're happy to take questions from the audience if you have any. So one of the first questions that we'd like you all to think about is, do you think, has architecture of a place ever made you feel adverse emotions, which I think is something you touched on earlier? And anybody that would like to go first?
Well, we've spoken about this before, but I think because I'm from Bangladesh, growing up, I'd have family members who'd work within the governments and be lawyers, and every time I'd pass those buildings, they'd be really grand, very European, and for me as a child, kind of seeing that, it kind of felt very out of context, but I knew that was different, and that kind of made me interested in architecture in one way, but kind of going through 3 years of architecture school and learning about colonialism and learning about all the negative effects, it kind of makes me feel a lot of adverse emotions, a lot of confused emotions, because when I was younger, that was something that I might have potentially aspired to be somehow, because it was something that intrigued me, but now it kind of just makes me upset and angry and quite frustrated that that's even the case and remnants like that still exist, and there's not much education on it, not unless you kind of go through a specific discipline.
Yeah, I think I would say same for me. I feel like walking around cities in general, there's always a sense of buildings could tell you what you're supposed to do in them. So sometimes you go to a place and you know you need to dress a certain way to be allowed to enter. Or from the get-go, the person at the door says, why are you here? And they didn't ask the next person. So sometimes the building in itself definitely has made me feel maybe I shouldn't be walking through here without even knowing what's going on behind the doors. And I think in general, that notion alone is, I would say, unnecessary or weak, in that I feel as architects or as designers, we give buildings their function. So, for example, you could easily say a building that was a church before nowadays would be a market stall, or it could be H&M. But in the olden days, you might have to be holy to walk in. But the moment you change that to something else, you could suddenly walk into the exact same building. Nothing's changed. But if you change the function of it, then somehow you're suddenly allowed to enter. So I think the very notion that the function of a place is fleeting and we give it that function, we shouldn't be allowing architecture to dictate what happens around society. We should use it to aid or help the immediate society, I think.
I think one of the things that made me uncomfortable is the architecture of occupation. So when it comes to Palestine, for instance, there's a whole way of doing architecture to create these power relationships. And just one of the examples is these checkpoints that cut the whole West Bank. So as a Palestinian, you always have to pass through these checkpoints, and you literally find yourself within a long cage, people queue in order to pass control. And the crazy thing about that is that you have to pass this control because you're somehow suspected, but you're actually not, I mean, you're not guilty of anything, but the only guilt is being Palestinian. So this whole architecture of, making you pass through these checkpoints, or the fact that there's a whole way of building settlements in the West Bank, where all the settlements are built on hills, and all the Palestinian cities are in the valleys. So all the settlements have a total view around, and while the Palestinian cities are somehow not in control of what's happening around, even from just a viewpoint. So I think this is one of the things we came across, like how architecture can create these power relationships.
And I think it's not doesn't have to be that tangible either. That it's not just about how spaces are occupied and how people in certain spaces act around you, but also just the sort of building itself, and well, first of all, how the materials, like where have they been sourced from, like the economy that is like underlying the whole industry, basically, which is, I mean, dictated by like the West, broadly speaking. And for example, Anjola mentioned the other day in Nigeria how like the sort of Western way of building, like architecture with sort of thick walls and just adding tons of like air conditioning to sort of compete, or I mean to just air conditioning, when you could simply have, you know, very light architecture that allows for natural ventilation and so on. And I think that is also so that's a sort of architecture that is imposed very much, and that's obviously it has a history to it. And it's the same with if you look in China, for example, where sort of the rise of the Chinese economy is very much, you know, based on the West, like feeding China the sort of building blocks for them to become this superpower that it is today. And people are just very sort of, the sort of glitz and glamour and the like power that these skyscrapers symbolize are very, you know, yeah, people are very attracted to them, but then don't realize the sort of politics that are working behind that, which is, yeah, it can be sort of frustrating as well.
I think also, if you're talking about the history of a place, it's important to acknowledge, if you're talking about materials or the actual building, who built it and who suffered through building it, because many of the places that we walk around, nowadays you just walk around them like Merchant City, you walk around it and be like, oh, it's really nice, it's pretty fancy, but you forget the actual history and the colonial history. And so I think because there's a lack of accountability and we're not necessarily taught the true effects of like the British Empire, you end up walking around places, and if you didn't know otherwise, you would just be in awe of them, or you would think it's grand. But then when you actually look at the history and look into it, you realize that it was on the backs of your people, or it was like people that you could easily, if you were in their time, be in the place of, and you would be suffering. But not a lot of people here would be in that position because of the demographic of this country. And so I think there should just be a greater acknowledgement of the history of buildings and what they might symbolize, or what a statue in Kelvin Grove Park might symbolize. Because maybe it's a war memorial, maybe it's signifying some great victory for Britain, but then it's not for all of the British people, and it's not for all of the people that now live here, and maybe for them it's something that is actually a lot more devastating. So it's easy to walk around a city and feel like you can feel nothing looking at these buildings until you actually look into their history, and suddenly it's actually devastating, and it's appalling, the history behind them.
One of the other things we thought of when we talked about colonial architecture is the fact that usually when we study colonial architecture is from an aesthetic point of view, while there are like social impacts. For instance, we came across Senegal and Dakar, and Dakar was one of the guardian cities of the French Empire, and what happened is that around it you had a slum growing really fast because people were attracted by the city that was born through this empire. And while you had a very tidy and nice hub for the garden city around it, you had millions of people gathering to get jobs. And to us is quite odd the fact that, yeah, we study this from a very aesthetic point of view, so from the idea of the garden city, but then we don't know the consequences of this. Yeah.
Okay, so now we're going to ask you to think a little bit about what you think about architecture of today. You've touched upon that a little bit as well, so there might be a little bit of repetition, but that's obviously cool. Just do you think it's representative, you know, the architecture that you see in the worlds that you move in? Do you feel it's representative of the multicultural society that we live and claim to have?
I'd say, personally, I think of it from two perspectives for myself. In Glasgow, I don't know that much about the architecture or the history of it. But for me, walking around Glasgow, I can tell that it's a Glaswegian city. You could see the buildings. It kind of represents what the place is about. If you go down to West End or even in city centre, a lot of the buildings are kept as they are and repurposed, but you can still see, I guess, the history of how they used to build, the materials that were used in that time. If I think back home to Nigeria, we have, first of all, just a couple of different styles of architecture, and it's usually just down to the cost of the projects, how much or how quick and how cheap can you build. So you have buildings that are American style, Oriental, it could be anything, but unless you went into the villages or the lesser developed places, you wouldn't find anything that I'd say is Nigerian. I don't even know what I'd say is Nigerian architecture. I think that's an issue. If we're studying architecture, the architecture should be able to evolve with the people. And I think Mia said that as well. Even the society of Britain today isn't just white anymore. To be British isn't to be white. So I feel even here, the architecture should show that and should be allowed to take influences from all around the world, because that's what they did anyway. People traveled, took inspiration from other countries and brought it back here. And now that the people are actually here as well, why stop that? Why make it a one-size-fits-all? Everyone builds the modular and just drops it on site. I think the architecture should be allowed to express the people who are there and change with the people who are there as well.
I think also adding to that, we should dismantle the idea that there's like a superior architecture and that like European architecture is the one that is hailed like around the world as being better, when like it's evidently not, depending on climate and also just depending on the situation. And so like architecture should be representative of the people that it's going to be used by, and also the idea that it just doesn't need to stick as like one thing. It can change and evolve, and it should.
So just to add to that, the word vernacular came to my mind. I think the very fact that we refer to architecture that's from anywhere else as vernacular is already a problem in its own rights rather. Or the fact that we think building a mud house is ancient, for example. When we give aid to other countries, the first thing we want to do is clear all the mud houses or clear all the original architecture that's there and build it exactly as, I guess, we think is best. I remember an example of, I think it was even with the School of Arts, one of the programs they had where they go to a developing country and they build for the people. And they ended up designing this house for a community that the women lived together and they cooked together. And they basically placed the kitchen on the edge somewhere, and it was just 4 walls. And they found that the women never cooked in the kitchen and they always cooked outside. And after a while, the architects asked why, and the answer was simply, first of all, the food that we cook just makes too much smoke. We can't do it in there. Secondly, because we all cook together, we like to cook in the center of the house. That could have been something that would have been asked at the very first stage of design, where do you want us to put the kitchen? But you think you're going to somewhere else to help out, we know how to do it best, we're gonna design it and give it to you, and it should work.
I mean, yeah, just adding to that as well, that you sort of have these, I mean, the notion of a vernacular architecture is good and bad. I guess the term arose for good reasons, because, you wanted to, or people wanted to bring light to, that there are other types of architecture, but at the same time, it obviously exoticized and these different type of architectures, put them into categories, and just adding to that, how you have I mean, I saw that even you have it here at the GSA, but you also have it I also saw that in my own school, high school, where they'd advertise, come along and build mud huts in this exotic African country or wherever, and sort of just advertising sort of the white savior basically, and them coming in and helping out these poor kids, which also not only builds a stereotype about the architecture, but also just the image of the nation where the person is going. So yeah,
I think to me the problem is the filter you see you see things through. So when you think of vernacular architecture, you're putting a whole culture into one term, while when you think of European architecture, you have a whole knowledge of historical movements and way of doing architecture in different times. And already having this difference, to me, explains the filter you see things through. So instead of seeing Nigerian architecture through history, I'm sure it's changed. I'm sure like every place, Nigeria is like a huge country with different cultures and so many different tribes. Instead of seeing it in all its differences, it's vernacular, or what came after the vernacular, which is the technological advancement of that imperialism brought. Yeah, it's like diminishing, I think, somehow, the culture.
And we've touched a little bit upon education. I know that from conversations that we had before this, that a lot of you weren't aware, of Glasgow's history, a lot of the history of the buildings. So it's just having you think about how the educational system and your experience, being Glasgow School of Art architecture students, reckons with this reality. And also just think a little bit about movements that are taking place across universities across the UK to decolonise the curriculum, which is asking for greater representation of non-European and non-Western theory and practice, but also going beyond that and looking for other forms of education that exist outside of the academy, because that's also what decolonisation is. So just a little bit on what your thoughts are and around decolonisation, education, and who should be leading that. Should it be students or should it be the institutions themselves? It's a big meaty question for you.
I think it's hard to assume that, everyone that is going to architecture school or art school or design school or whatever, to become or create something progressive or new. It's hard when I think architecture school is stuck in its traditional ways of teaching and kind of teaching the same things over and over again. Because I think it's kind of from my own experience, the last 3 years, I've kind of learned about the same, very specific things in Glasgow, 3 times. And I think, each year it's just a little bit more information. But I think, it's easy to say that you've come to Glasgow to learn about Glasgow, but I've actually come to architecture school to learn about architecture, and it's hard when I feel at the end of this I feel I don't really have a sort of balanced view of the world or good opinions, because I feel a lot of it is me trying to have to find it myself and kind of find people who might agree with me or kind of suss out the situation. So I mean, it's good when it is student-led because you can kind of share that information more, and everything that's new can be shared quickly, but it's a hard thing to regulate, and it's definitely something that has to be done from within the system, and institutions to kind of start recognizing that maybe that they should start doing things differently perhaps, and maybe then we won't have these issues anymore.
I think this is a very personal question for me. And the reason is that I spent, the first 2/3 of my education in Nigeria. So what I would call history of art is history of African art. And then you get to architecture school here, and in a crit, someone is trying to give advice, and they say, do you know this architect? And I go, no. And immediately they almost feel like, should I even bother telling her? She obviously isn't interested or isn't well read, but I feel like just because I don't know who Le Corbusier is doesn't mean I don't know what architecture is, or doesn't mean I don't know any other architect. I feel like there's a certain expectation of you to know a certain number of people or a certain type of people, and anything short of that is inadequate. And frankly, it does, whereas it may seem as a surface issue, these things do affect your grade. It affects how people read your work. If you don't have references that they could recognize as strong or originating of some said in-depth research, sometimes you find people genuinely spending more time defending the source that's not known than actually getting feedback on the work they're doing. And I think that in itself is definitely something that should be looked into. On the other hand, though, something I've done now coming back from my year out is kind of not necessarily ignored the formal education, but I had no idea there were other forms. As you said, for example, I was lucky to be invited to join a group called Black Females in Architecture. So that's a very specific demographic, and it doesn't apply to everyone, but it applies to me. And I feel like if we, as individuals, could find little groups that are doing things specific to us to add on to the formal side, you find out that there's actually a lot more going on, especially in this day and age, to challenge the system. And a lot of people are not waiting for it to be introduced into curriculum because that just takes too long. A lot of people are actually, and things like this even wouldn't be talked about in a Friday lecture. I mean, Friday lectures maybe, but in the regular daily lectures, events like this, or you just personally going out to seek out people who are like you, even this society, for example, them asking me to come build a table. Why would I do that? The only reason I came was specifically because they were people of color to begin with, not because it was architecture. It was summer, I was tired of summer. But yeah, I feel like we have the power to do it ourselves. And we're lucky to get formal education, so why not have both, is what I think.
Well, obviously, so I completely agree, but then I also think when we end up being marginalized into creating our own groups, it means that we become so informed and we know so much, but then our peers who are also going to go and become other architects, and we're going to be in practices with them, or we'll be running against them for jobs and things, they don't get that same variety in education. And I think that's where the issue stands, because if it's not part of the curriculum, and it isn't at the minute, then we end up with knowing so much about each other's backgrounds and each other's architectural backgrounds and architectures of different cultures, but then the people who have, well, I would argue the most say because they're the majority, they don't have that knowledge and understanding and can't see where their privilege might lie. So I think it has to be something that's institutional and enforced by the government, because otherwise I don't think anyone will change. But I think it's great that we end up having our own places, because otherwise it's draining, constantly having to explain yourself and constantly having to explain why you're doing something, and why, just because you hadn't heard of Le Corbusier, it didn't mean you'd heard of plenty of other great architects. So having our own spaces that are so nurturing for our own mental health and our own architectural development, that's just important.
I mean, I think that what Anjola was talking about was sort of a symptom of the problem that Leah mentioned, that there's nothing is being done about it. So, and yeah, it's that sort of touches upon the whole sort of dichotomy between sort of being vocal about the POC struggle, or not being vocal, because if you are trying to be vocal, or trying to change it from the inside, well, first of all, it's hard to sort of change people's opinions, whereas yeah, but then if you do these kind of things of setting up your own groups, people then like sort of shrug and be like, you know, why are you like trying to, if you're trying to create an equal society, why are you like trying to distance yourself from us? And like it's either the sort of the whole don't see race approach, or it's the sort of I mean it goes hand in hand, like either I don't see race, or like being sort of offended that like you're trying to carve out your own space. I mean, obviously, the obvious like solution is, you know, it's talking about representation, and like fine, you can sort of start to have more diversity within the students you hire and the staff you hire. But sure, that is, I think it's also easy for institutions to think, okay, we have a diverse staff, and now we can just move on. Whereas, it's also about looking backwards, and what you like mentioned about decolonization, also sort of decolonizing sort of the campuses. I mean, the perfect example is the statue of that slave trader. What's his name? The slave trader that there was a statue in the South African campus. Rhodes, yes, thank you. Him, and I believe there's a statue of him in like GU somewhere as well. So, just how that there was a student movement for the sort of removal of that statue, which like critics were like, I mean, this is a part of history, you can't erase history. But no, we're not erasing history, we're erasing the celebration of this person, we're not erasing this person. So
I also think do you so like on the topic of celebrating people, often what we find is the architects that we're taught are like glorified in some sense. So like going back to Le Corbusier, I actually wrote an essay about him like this year, and it took like a really sharp U-turn at one point, because I read an article that said he was actually a fascist, and up till that point I was going along like, oh, Le Corbusier, like it's so good, and then suddenly I was like, I read the article, and then I got led to other articles, and it was like, oh my god, okay, stop, this essay is going in a different direction. And it was interesting because even though our tutor said like it was a really bold statement to make as an essay, it was also like I was confused why we weren't taught that history, because we were told, so like she must have been aware of it to not like downgrade my like and say it was false, but at the same time it was like, why are we not taught the truth about them? Because we were sort of taught this very like pretty picture, and that it was meant to be like, you know, a kind of utopia. It's based on maths. It's the idea is that people can be simplified into certain like house types. So it means that everyone has like equal access to this and to green space and everything, into schools. But then the idea that everyone is put into a box, and then it kind of becomes totalitarian in the sense that no one has that free choice to express themselves through architecture. And it was like he was importing a lot of materials in this town, or he built this city called Chandigarh, and he was importing materials that weren't good for the environment there and that don't make sense for the climate. And so suddenly you have all these people and all these academics hailing him, but when the people that are writing those journals and the academics themselves don't realize, or they don't see his architecture as something damaging, then they just write the positives. And so it was interesting to see that we'd been taught like a very, very glamorized and like just sort of uplifting version of him. And maybe he did have those good qualities, but to then not teach the bad qualities completely, it sort of like makes him one-dimensional, when in reality there are so many other facets to his work that need to be discussed and need to be more mainstream. So yeah, I don't think, exactly as Carl was saying, like you're not erasing their history, because you can acknowledge that they've done good things, but I think you have to acknowledge it within the context of their career and of the architecture that they built. And it wasn't good for everyone, and you have to acknowledge that to be truthful.
Yeah. And yeah, that also reminds me of sort of like, it's a cliche, but like the history books were written by the winners, kind of, which is kind of true in a way, because if you look at, yeah, for example, when we've read about Heidegger, who was German, obviously, like every textbook is quick to say that, oh, he was, sympathies with the Nazi party, whereas, yeah, like, we really have to dig into like information about Le Corbusier to find out that, oh, well, maybe he was a fascist, I don't know, or maybe he was definitely like a sexist, at least, just graffitiing like a female architect's building. Anyway, but yeah, but so yeah, it's about questioning and being critical to like all the steps that have been leading up to where we are now.
I think if we can like figure out a way to like reevaluate the curriculum and like reevaluate people that we give good reputations to, and kind of figure out a way to just kind of be able to lay out the facts and the pros and the cons, and also start thinking about how architecture changes over time. Because I think the reason why a lot of these conversations are happening now is because like so much time has passed where we can actually look at things retrospectively and can see very direct results, like or cause and effect things, and we can highlight them. So I think if there's like a way to kind of do that within architectural education, within like the system, I think it would just mean that everyone would have a more balanced education, and it would be less biased, and I think everyone would then be able to be aware of everything and just kind of have the bigger picture. That's hard to do.
Yeah, I think just what you're saying about that, it's also worth considering that there are only 38 black female professors in the whole of the UK. And when you think about how many universities that there are in the UK, and yeah, how many of those are black women. So then it's, what's preventing them from getting into those positions, and it's thinking about the much more broader issues, which is what we're talking about. And then when they're in those positions to begin with, is that their work to then be doing anti-racist work and to be doing, the decolonisation work, where's the support to keep them in those positions, essentially. So just worth bearing that in mind. So I'm going to ask you a little bit, and I think you've touched on this as well, and we're doing pretty great for time, so it flew by. Just to consider what you think are some of the challenges that you feel black and architects of colour in Britain face.
I think the only way to look at it for me, I mean, I'm not technically an architect yet, so it'd be hard to say, and I haven't worked in the UK as well, so. But maybe in terms of what I've noticed in the media, when I see what is considered, or architecture from architects who aren't black, it's things that are tangible. They're actual buildings, they're schools, they're hotels, homes, cities. But when I see work of black architects, it's often things that happened maybe just for the summer in somewhere in London, or they're more short builds, or they're sort of feel-good architecture. They're not necessarily, I don't think, having as much say in what is actually in the market. It's more maybe things that are like responses to quick competitions, or things that are more surface, what maybe you might interpret more as art or sculpture than a building, or again, I think there's a good side to that, in that I've taken more interest in those things because they seem to have more of a hold on social issues. A lot of these things are immediate or temporary responses to issues in the present society or in the area that they're built. And a lot of them are sort of research-based as well. They take information, they actually go back and they gather and they find out what has this architecture done for the place, and then they take it and they do it somewhere else and they tweak it slightly. So I think that is what architecture should be, but at the same time, it's not necessarily what is glamorized. You wouldn't win awards for building that kind of thing, I think.
Can you just say the question? Can you say the question again?
I'm just shouting now. I'm so used to it. Just what do you feel some of the challenges are of black and architects of colour face in the UK?
Yeah, my experience is a bit different because I don't think I'm gonna work in the UK because I'm from Italy, and I'm studying in Switzerland, so my experience is a bit different. But then to me, what I struggled the most is not having chances, because I can say I was always quite privileged. I got to have internships around Europe and outside of Europe. To me, my personal experience is more cultural. So going back again to the dichotomy of West against the world, or POC against the West, to me that's the actual problem, like creating this dichotomy. And I end up often like failing into seeing that there's no dichotomy actually, but it's a mix of culture, because like what imperialism created is this huge mix of culture, and to divide it into two big categories is the actual problem to me. So trying to understand the complexity of what are other cultures, but also what the West is, because at the end, I guess we're also, I mean, we're Western, we're not. So like trying to understand the West is not one big thing, but it's also a big mix of cultures, and these cultures were influenced by the whole imperialism in different ways, cultural, economical. So that's to me the challenge, trying to make it more complex instead of creating this huge dichotomy that is just dividing people, because every time you try to talk about this, it's me against the world or the world against us. It's like it doesn't lead to anywhere to me.
Yeah, I think that that is sort of represent like the main, maybe the sort of main obstacle, which is just language itself, and how you have that language of like dualities, and like language sort of exists to simplify things and like crystallize like the mess that is going on in your head into like just short sort of words and sentences. And so yeah, again, like maybe it's hard to sort of, it's probably the biggest challenge of all, to sort of make people realize that it's not as easy as to pit two things against each other, when in fact it's like two things that are in a sort of a grid or like net of different relationships which affect each other through history and now.
I think so, like from what I've personally seen, a lot of people don't want to talk about race, which is a big issue, in the sense of like people are ready to solve, like try and be sustainable, and they want to like do whatever they can, but when you turn to people and say, oh, but this is also an issue we face, it's like just like a shield goes up, and it's like, oh, I didn't realize that, but that's not my problem. And so I think you'll see a lot of practices that are saying they're trying to be sustainable and they're doing this and this. And they will also say that they want to make sure that diversity and there's inclusivity, but then you essentially end up becoming like a token in those practices. So I think there should be a focus, or there should be more talking about race and not necessarily led by POCs, because it's actually kind of draining to have to like explain it every time. But like, I think the idea that racism, or like people are more afraid to be called racist than actually do something racist, is something that happens like daily. So you'll see actions and you'll pull people up on it, and then they'll say, oh look, but like, you know, I'm not racist, you know that. But then it's like, your actions didn't say otherwise. And also, even if you don't do anything that's not racist, if you're complicit in a society, or you're complicit in not changing the society, then you're allowing yourself to benefit, and you're essentially, like, it's sort of like you're racist, or you're actively, oh wait, no. You're like, yeah, you're actively trying to change it, or you're kind of racist, or you're complicit in a system that is. And I don't think you can be in the middle. There's no gray area, especially if you're like us and you're affected daily. So I think, especially in architecture, I'd like to see more people and like more of our peers, more companies and practices being active in their fight against racism, or their fight against like the fact that we are pushed into a category, or we're pushed into an other, or we're pushed into something else, and we're not allowed to just exist. Because I think in not doing anything, they are still doing something.
Silent nods. Okay, and that leads quite nicely into how do you feel your practice, or does your practice represent yourself in any way, and if so, how?
So I think for us, we struggled with this question a bit, and the reason is, when you say practice, you think in work, but you guys, well, I've been on my year out, so let's just say none of us have worked. So maybe we should think about it from studio practice. When you're given a brief, do you think culture influences that? For me, I try to bring some aspect of culture into what I'm doing. For example, second year we were doing in, don't remember what this town is called, but somewhere in Glasgow, we were doing things to do with marketplaces. And I decided to bring literally a Nigerian market idea and drop it in there with the colorful umbrellas and table stalls. And I just thought it would be pretty. And that was my way of, I guess, looking for little joys. But then you get into a problem where someone says to you, oh, but there's no fridges, for example, or it doesn't look like Tesco, essentially. I'm like, that's the point. I didn't want to design another Sainsbury's just with better timber. I wanted it to be something that represented a people. And whereas in studio it's easy to be abstract, if it was really in Glasgow, maybe that wouldn't be appropriate for the people. But even the fact that in education, where it's supposed to be run wild and think free, you're still not allowed to do just that. There's still a standard of what is considered right, and that always clashes with, I guess, my notion of culture.
I think also just like jumping on that, I still haven't figured out what is creatively allowed and what isn't, because some people will be like that. Yeah, in second year we had a similar project, but like it wasn't a market, but we had like a microdalling, and our tutors are saying, like, you can do anything. You can have it so like, you're having to climb a 20-meter pole, and the flat is actually just in the middle of the town centre, and there's a light, and there are no, like, solid walls, it's all glass. but then you'll turn around and do something that's like culturally different, and that's when they draw the line and say like, oh, actually, no, we didn't mean that, you can't do that. So it's like you're trying to navigate a field that you don't know the rules to, and no one will tell you the rules, and then you're constantly tripping up, and then you're sort of doing badly for it, and you don't know why, and no one will explain why. And so it's like, yeah, you're constantly losing, and then you suffer for it, because then as we're graded, suddenly you realize that you're doing badly, or you might fail, and you've got all of that weight on your shoulders when you just don't know how, like you don't understand how to work the system, because I think it pretty much is working a system. So you're constantly tripping up by your own tutors, by whatever you're doing, and there's like no way out of it.
I also think when you're studying as well, because obviously that's what most of our experience is from, just like from studio projects, you are just trying to like tick off like a checklist, because like at the end of the day, like Mia said, you are just trying to get a good grade, and when you do, you either get very discouraged or encouraged to it, but when you do get discouraged, like it kind of makes you not want to do it. And I think for me at least, kind of doing this project, it has made me realize like architecture can be anything, and you can make it into whatever you want, any scale, any size. But I think definitely in architecture school you get stuck in like this sort of whirlwind of just trying to tick everything off your checklist and trying to impress tutors. But when you do get discouraged, you kind of don't know where else to go, and then you kind of put yourself in a box, which is ironic, but that's just kind of how it ends up working out. And I think that once again, going back to like education, I think it would be so good if we did have sort of courses or workshops that would just allow for architecture to be as interdisciplinary as it is when it is in practice, but within education.
Yeah, it's like what Mia talked about to me is the fact that being political in architecture is not as explored or as other fields. So when it comes to try to be political, tutors are not always ready to support you, and also we're not ready to do that because it's not like a very explored field. So this like discourages you. And yeah, that's it. No, yeah. Do you want to add anything?
No, but I mean, yeah, architecture, I think it's hard for architecture not to be political unless you're building something in a vacuum. So, yeah, yeah, I think, and also, yeah, and it sort of, yeah, it feels sort of contradictory how where we have the sort of curriculum where we are encouraged to look back on very sort of conceptual and speculative projects from the past that can be quite radical, and like for example, like archigram is one that like sort of comes up quite often. And sure, so yeah, I mean, if we can devise a walking city, why can't we just make a city that is, you know, more equal and everything? Yeah, I don't know, but
and yeah. I also think to not be political is in some ways a privilege, because it means that you're not affected by it and you can close your eyes to it. And so like, if you cannot be political and you're fine with that, then what does it say about you, or what does it say about the institution? Because I think everyone should be able to take a break from it, but if you don't like have a say in anything, or you don't use your voice to say anything, then yeah, you're using your privilege, and yeah, for no good.
And yeah, I think we each carry power, and it's just trying to figure out what we want to do with that power. you'll be pleased to know it's the final question. So I guess, like, to end on a more positive, yay. Just wanted you to share your kind of visions and your aspirations of how you think we can collectively, through architecture, stand to dismantle all the issues that we've spoken about today.
To me, it's simply like try to integrate some more social studies into architecture education. This could be already a way of dismantling this very, aesthetical way of doing architecture, trying to integrate other issues about equality, POC, or just this queer space that we have behind us. I don't know. To me, that could be a way.
Yeah, definitely like Fringe in general. Just like I remember when Leah, she kind of approached us and kind of was explaining the whole thing to us, and it was just kind of about making architecture more approachable, and architecture doesn't have to be for architects to understand, kind of like making it a wider thing, because architecture is something that everyone can relate to or affects them. So I think by kind of bringing in issues into like architecture and kind of showing things in a more creative way as well, and like allowing our creativity to like manifest that way, I think would be helpful at least.
Yeah, I think I would say the same. I'll use Fringe as an example again. I think she's right in saying we were sought out and literally given an opportunity, given a budget, given ideas, support, and just allowed to constantly be us. And every time we doubted ourselves, they were there to say, just do it if you want to. If you think it's good, then it's good. And that's exactly what architecture schools should be. We shouldn't have to defend every single nuance of difference just because someone else doesn't agree with it. I don't see why architecture schools couldn't merge with groups like this and make it accessible to everyone. This is just, I mean, there's 5 of us here, and there were other people in the exhibition, but as a whole, I don't think we were even up to 15 of a school of how many architecture schools in Glasgow. It could be as simple as just making it accessible to every student. If it's a random 2-week course that runs and we are allowed to or not allowed to. But the idea that this is something that either happens in summer, or when you're looking for other opportunities, like I was saying, you have to decide if you're capable of balancing that with uni, because it doesn't merge. So I think definitely having a more official system where creativity is allowed to be expressed all around would be very, very helpful for us.
I also think... Oh, no, it's gone. Do you want to see your point, Carl?
No, you go.
Okay. Oh yeah. So I came to the Queer Space talk, and Sarah Wild said a really interesting thing. She essentially said that if you design for the most marginalized people in society, then you will be designing for everyone. And I guess I think I'd like to take that outlook in life further, like when we become architects and like grow older, because I think that's the only way you can have architecture that is accessible for everyone, because at the minute it's maybe like a set group of people that are designing, and they're not designing for everyone or with a balanced understanding of other societies and other cultures, and just also other people and who exist in their society. And so if you have people within that practice that are diverse and that are just like all types of people, and you design and make sure you design for them, then I think you're on the best track for actually making architecture workable, or make sure that it does work at the very least.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I have much to add. I mean, yeah, it's reiterating that, it's about representation and like beyond just tokenism that we talk, that, you know, the sort of set group of people that design for that you mentioned, that they do not like cater it to a certain group of of certain group of minority, and sort of which makes them feel good about themselves. I mean, it's about, I think, and the thing Sarah Wilde said, I'm gonna take that to my heart as well. But again, just question everything.
Thank you. So now we're going to have about 20 minutes for any audience questions. So how would you prefer to take one at a time or collect them all together?
One at a time.
So don't all rush at once. But if you have any questions, just however you feel best to ask them, you can even come up and use the mic, or if you have a voice that carries, feel free to ask away.
I'll just say as well, let's not. If you don't ask us any questions, we planned on asking you to answer the questions we just answered. So.
Hi, my name is Tamimi. Anjola's my little sister. I'm a Part 2 architect about to finish from UCA, so I kind of know what most of you are going through. But I have a few questions. A few things I got from this was identity, dialogue, and basically just having places that you could call your own, or recognizable or safe spaces for you guys to chill in, basically. But looking at cities and cities being developed, or people moving into cities at a faster rate than cities are being developed or growing, so overcrowding and issues with that. And considering you're trying to have cities that are more inclusive or representative of the demographic within them, how do you do that when you're considering time in the sense of basically the more people are moving in, there's less buildings to put these people in for whatever activities they need to be doing. But you do acknowledge that these buildings have to, one, the programs have to be clear, but they also have to be representative of the people that use them. But if you acknowledge that these users change over time, and the buildings and the people within them also change over time, how do you strike a balance whereas you're not changing constantly over time? And then secondly, sorry, I wrote this down. Secondly, if you're building for different cultures and users, and you're asking for basically more inclusive cities that are representative of you as people of color, and it goes back to basically the dichotomy of the West versus people of color. How do you strike a balance whereby you're not, by elevating yourselves, pushing the rest of the people down, so it's not a, you've had your time, we need to now come to the limelight kind of thing? Yeah, pretty much. Thank you.
Should we have this conversation at home? Okay, I think, just so I don't forget the last one, I'll answer the second question first. I think it's just the way life is. I don't think by creating visibility for someone, you necessarily have to reduce visibility for another. That's what we've been told, and that's what has been done, but I don't think it's the only way. I think even just with simple movements as, for example, building for the disabled, there was a time where that wasn't necessary. You didn't have to have ramps. I mean, something as little as that. The very notion of adding a ramp or adding disabled toilets or gender-neutral toilets didn't take away other people's rights to use toilets, for example. So I think it may not be easy, but without, if we don't start to try, then we'll just never know, and it wouldn't change. And then for the first question, Oh, yes. I think generally, for me, the only reason why cities become overcrowded is because we've allowed this notion of this is the way to live to continue to ride on. There's a certain standard of if you live in this type of house, you must be earning this type of money and living this type of life. If you allow people to be, first of all, proud of their own style of architecture in their own space, they wouldn't feel the need to migrate to the better. And as well, if we start to build for everyone, I think there will come a time where the change wouldn't be so drastic as feeling as we have to keep building the same, building different things every time. If I'll just use toilets again because they're easy. The fact that we have disabled toilets now means we don't have to keep, I guess, redesigning that one thing over and over again. There'll be nuances. For example, everyone now knows to be disabled doesn't just mean using a wheelchair. There's other disabilities, and now we start to consider that. But the moment you get through the first 60%, the rest of it isn't that grave, I guess, in affecting what the regular is. I don't know if that answers the question.
I also think in the past, I feel like architecture's been built with like one person or one individual in mind. So if we are building with the idea that it will be acceptable for many different people, I think through time, those, like, if there are different people that live in that, say, let's say it's a building, I think through time, the changes should be less noticeable because you're building with inclusivity in mind. And yeah, you're taking the biggest hurdle by already making it inclusive in the first place. So like, change should be less noticeable. I think it's harder when you have to, you know, like, look back on what you've got and try and change that because it already exists. So if you're designing with the intention of, oh yeah, the occupants are going to change, or the people who live here, they might not have the same rituals or the same way of going about life, and you allow for that in your architecture, then, I mean, maybe it's just naive, but hopefully it should also allow for that, yeah, like, yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Just before the rest of the Sorry, I just wanted to elaborate that on a bit more. So basically what I was alluding to in cities being more urbanized and people moving in, so you understand how in 2019 technology advances and things have moved beyond the last 20, 30 years, right? And because of those changes, the way you relate with those cities, the way you move about or interact changes, or has changed the last few years, right? So when you consider that and you understand that, okay, people need less room to live. So for example, 20 years ago, you probably had a family of 4 in a apartment. Now you have studio apartments. That changes the way your cities are being built. But if you have these buildings already there, and it's not such a, and you're thinking of it as you can't build anymore, so think the city's fully saturated now, but you have to keep building for new people coming in, because they're gonna come in. It's not a thing of where they're coming from is worse than where they're going to. It's just rural to urban migration, just move into better opportunities. They're going to move in regardless. You can't control that, but you have to facilitate for them moving in, and that's kind of like my question.
Oh, thank you. I think for me, what I'm beginning to realize is that life moves in cycles, and as much as we think we're inventing things and we're building for, yes, a variety of people, things repeat. So I don't think it would necessarily make what currently exists obsolete, in that if we think about fashion, for example, what our grandparents used to wear wasn't worn by our parents, but we start to wear these same things and we think it's new, and then someone says, actually, that's the exact same pants that these other guys wore years ago. I think, again, the other thing about being inclusive is culture is, we see culture as nation or country, but culture is essentially the people. So what was Western before definitely shouldn't be Western now, in that maybe the majority of British people now aren't only whites. I mean, I'm not saying majority, but it's to be British before would have definitely been whites, but that's not what it is now. So I think if you begin to design for people as it evolves, yes, you're including other people, and yes, the architecture is changing, but I think because as humans, we hardly invent anything new, there would always be someone who still needs that other thing. There would always be some people who don't want the change, and they could stay in the buildings who exist, but we shouldn't be worried about providing newer opportunities. I think I struggle with this a lot when we're designing in studio. We have, you write in your brief, I want to make this a multi-purpose space, and you're like, how do I do that? And you literally always end up with a hall. Just come in and do whatever you want. It's where we're trying to get to, but again, it's not a question that I think can be answered by one person or by one civilization even. I think it's something that's going to have to keep evolving, and that is what architecture should be. We think architecture is buildings now, but what if the architecture of a chair, for example, has changed over the years? The way people sit, posture, even our diet is changing. These things have to all influence each other, and this is why we said this, I think we alluded to this at the start, that architecture shouldn't just be buildings anymore. It could be furniture, it could be a table, it could be shoes. Zaha had a shoe line. Like, it could be anything you want, really. So if you see it from that idea that it's more of a broader spectrum of things, the same way you think what we were allowed to eat a couple of years ago, we're told we definitely shouldn't be. If we're quick to accept those things, I think we should also be quick to accept changes in buildings as well.
Also, maybe we shouldn't think of architecture, or like, say we design a building, that is it in its most finalized state. So like the idea that you can design in a, like, maybe it's a modular way, but you can like take that down very easily and you can build it up differently depending on who's occupying it. So maybe it's like where before we would have designed a lot of brick, or we would have built with like brick as a facade and all of this, blah, blah, blah. Now we're moving more towards timber because it's more sustainable and all of this. And maybe then with those newer technologies, we can also design with better techniques and like techniques that allow for us to take them down easier. And it doesn't have to be something that will be there in 100 years' time. Because I think also architecture in the past was like an ego boost, and it was like to show power, and it was to say like, this is our empire, this is how powerful we are, and we will survive forever. But now I think we know that we're changing, and we can see it in our like relative history, and so to design with finality seems like pointless because we're like ever changing.
Okay, are there any, that question took quite a lot into our time. So if there's anybody that has like any questions they'd like to ask, feel free to, but obviously there'll be time afterwards when everybody's having drinks, where we'll also encourage you to try at the table, but not after too many drinks. So, if you have any questions. Oh, yes, we do.
Can you and should you separate an architect from their architecture?
And I think we'll just hear the other question as well, so if we might have some crossover.
Yeah, it was about education. You talked a lot about the curriculum and changing the curriculum. I was just wondering if there's one change to the structure of education rather than the curriculum, like rather than the things that are taught in it, what would it be?
Do you guys want to say anything? Okay. I think it's. I'm actually more interested in what you guys have to say about that question of separating the architects from the architecture. In terms of the question about curriculum, I think I'm completely in agreement with what you're saying. I've always for example, I had no idea about the idea of apprenticeships when I came here, and then I found out that you could actually have skipped the whole of architecture school and gone and worked somewhere, earned money, and learned on the job. I think education definitely, and I think this is something that cuts across all subjects, it's not just architecture. We've been learning in the same way, the same things, over and over again for thousands of years. And even employers have issues with this. I remember trying to apply for jobs in my year out. Someone asked me for specific things, and then I said I didn't have it. And I was lucky because they basically were worried, and they were, why don't you have it? Are you failing at school? I'm like, we just haven't done this. This is 3 years of education, and this is what I've been taught, and this is what everyone else has been taught. So if you're looking for something else, you're not getting it from us, in my year at least. So it's the very fact that somehow, for some reason, education is kept as this thing that happens in institutions and buildings elsewhere, and we're not relating with the marketplace at all. And that's not working. I don't know why it's like that, but it's not working. In terms of separating the architect from the architecture, I think it's very difficult to, for the person themselves, the architect, to remove themselves, no matter how many times you say you did this for other people. It's architecture is a language at the end of the day. So you say one thing, I'm hearing maybe 80% of what you're saying, and the 20% is my opinion, my culture, my background. So it would always be like that. So I don't necessarily think it's a big problem. I understand, I think, where you're coming from in that a lot of the time, especially when we look at these architects that we've all studied, the star architects, they are very much their architecture, even down to their clothing that they wear. You could see direct, I guess, transcriptions of themselves. I think it's down to what we currently do. No longer is one person allowed, just because of their name, to build a whole city. You need to go through planning, you need to speak to engineers, you need to speak to other companies. I think that's a start of how we could do that, but I don't know if it's something we could completely eradicate, in my opinion.
I think, I mean, that your question about separating the architect from his or her or their architectures, I mean, it's similar to the question of can you separate art from the artist, but the thing about architecture obviously is that in many cases, you don't have control of what you end up building. I mean, it's obviously, because you have the influence of your client and of regulations and everything like that. So, also that's also historical in the way that buildings are not sort of they're not named after the architect, but they're named after the client. So I think historically we have the trend that they have been separate, and I think it should be more or less be that sort of separation should sustain, because again, we don't obviously architects often want creative freedom, but regulations and like the needs of the client are there for a reason. So it's about not only putting the blame maybe on the architect, but sort of furthering to maybe it's a question of sort of the historical context of maybe it was built this way not because of the architect's preference, but because of trends or like sort of the paradigm that it was built within. So
I guess also going to the question of the architect and like the architecture, I think you also have to view the architecture as like a stage where society is enacted. So if an architect chooses to impose certain beliefs and certain like belief systems through their architecture, then I think they should also be held accountable for how they change, or how they change people's movements throughout that building or throughout whatever it is. So obviously there are like regulations and things like that, and I think maybe there is a need for like a broader look into how regulations impact design, but I think the architect themselves should also consider how they're forcing people to act in a space and maybe enforce a cultural norm that isn't their own, or like some sort of heteronormative standard that isn't their own. And so I think taking blame off of the architect also allows for us to go out into the world and be like, oh, we're just creating buildings and it's all fun and dandy, but then we don't actually look at the implications of our buildings and how that might actually alter someone's life in like quite a drastic way.
Yeah, so definitely like the architect, like both sides, both client and architect, and sort of rulebook they work within, all of them should have a sort of
like
critical,
the client as well.
Yeah.
To me, it also depends on who the client is. So who are you building for? It changes a lot if you're doing something that is supposed to be public, or if you're working with a private client and you're building just a private house. In that case, I think you're basically following the direction of this client. But when it comes to public buildings, I think there, an architecture office practice should not be just about a style or a language, but about the consequences of the space, how we design the space. If in our practice we have somebody who's guiding us on like more social aspects of it. So yeah, I think who you're building for, to me, it changes a lot.
Perfectly on time. That's the question and answer session wrapped up for just now. So again, if I can just remind you that the zines are available over there for donation, but the posters are available free of charge. We do encourage you to come and try out the table, sit on the seats and experience the other as manifested as a table. But most importantly, if everybody could put their hands together and wait until I've finished their names, because it's important to hear everybody's names, for Anjola, Carl, Tareq, Alicia and Mia.